We are going to explain to you the anatomy of the calf, but first we need to remind you of some important terminology. Cranial, caudal, and rostral. Cranial means towards the head, while caudal means towards the tail. Rostral means towards the nose. Dorsal and ventral. Dorsal means towards the backbone, and ventral means towards the abdominal wall. Distal and proximal. Distal means away from the point of attachment, while ventral means towards the point of attachment. Medial and lateral. Medial means towards the median plane, while lateral means away from the median plane. Other terms that may be useful to know is adduction and abduction. Remember, adduction is bringing the limb towards the median plane, while abduction is bringing the limb away from the median plane. Now that you're aware of these directional terms, let's get started on learning the bovine anatomy. The muscular system. Learning all the muscles in the bovine may seem very daunting, so to make it easier, we will tackle them in sections. Muscles of the abdomen. The transversus abdominis muscle originates in the deep thoracolumnar fascia and inserts in the linea alba. The obliquus externus abdominis muscle originates in the last few ribs and the thoracolumnar fascia and inserts in the linea alba. The obliquus internus abdominis originates in the tuba coccyx and the transverse processes of the lumbar, and it inserts in the linea alba. Muscles of respiration. The external intercostal muscles and the internal intercostal muscles. The external intercostal muscles have fibers running ventrad and caudad, while the fibers in the internal intercostal muscles run ventrad and crania. The diaphragm. This is a dome-shaped sheet of muscle that separates the thoracic and abdominal cavities. Together, these muscles allow air to be brought in and out of the lungs by contractions that increase and decrease the size of the thorax. Muscles of thoracic limb. The trapezius muscle originates in the ligamentum nuchae and ligaments of the dorsal midline and inserts in the scapular spine. This allows the scapula to be lifted and retracted. The rhomboidus muscle also originates in the ligamentum nuchae and ligaments of the dorsal midline, however, inserts in the medial side of the scapular cartilage in order to lift the scapula and the neck. The serratus ventralis muscle originates in the transverse processes of caudal, cervical, and cranial thoracic vertebra and the first 8 to 9 ribs. It inserts in the medial scapular and scapular cartilage. The serratus ventralis also lifts the neck. The supraspinatus muscle originates in the supraspinous fossa of scapula and inserts in the greater tubercle of the humerus. This enables the extension of the shoulder. The infraspinatus muscle originates in the infraspinous fossa of the scapula and inserts in the greater tubercle of the humerus. This allows for the shoulder to flex. Remembering where the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus are located on the scapula can be somewhat confusing, so one way to remember it is that the supraspinatus is superior to the infraspinatus and is therefore located on the cranial side of the scapula. The subscapularis muscle originates in the subscapular fossa and inserts in the medial humerus, allowing shoulder stabilization. The latissimus dorsi muscle originates in the spinous processes of the thoracic and lumbar vertebrae and inserts in the medial humerus. This permits the shoulder to flex and the limb to retract. The pectoralis muscle, superficialis and profundus, originates in the cranial sternum, costal cartilages, and the ribs, and inserts in the craniomedial humerus. This enables adduction and retraction of the limb. The biceps brachii muscle originates in the supraglenoid tubercle of the scapula and inserts in the cranial aspect of the proximal radius and ulna. The biceps brachii allow the elbow to flex and the shoulder to extend. The triceps brachii originates in the caudal border of the scapula and the proximal humerus and inserts in the olecranon process of the ulna. The triceps brachii works in opposite to the biceps brachii in that it extends the elbow and flexes the shoulder. Muscles of the pelvic limb. The gluteus medius muscle originates in the caudal border of the scapula and the proximal humerus and inserts in the olecranon process of the ulna. This allows for the extension of the hip. The biceps femoris muscle originates in the sacrum, the sacroiliac ligament, and ischial tuber and inserts in the patellar ligament, patella, and calcaneal tuber. This muscle provides multiple movements such as the extension of the hip and stifle and the flexion of the stifle and extension of the hock. The semimembranosus muscle originates in the caudal vertebrae, sacroiliac ligament, and ischial tuber and inserts in the medial distal femur and the medial proximal tibia. The semimembranosus allows for the extension of the hip and stifle and flexion of the stifle. The semitendinosus muscle originates in the sacrum, caudal vertebrae, sacrociliac ligament, and the ischial tuber, and it inserts in the cranial tibia and the calcaneal tuber. This enables the extension of the hip, stifle, and hock, and flexion of the stifle. The tensor fascia lata muscle originates in the tuber coccyx and inserts in the fascia lata. This enables the flexion of the hip and the extension of the stifle. The gracilis muscle originates in the pelvic symphysis and inserts in the medial aspect of the proximal tibia. This enables the adduction of the limb. The quadriceps femoris originates in the proximal femur and the body of the ilium and inserts in the patella. This enables the extension of the stifle and the flexion of the hip. The gastrocnemius muscle originates in the caudal aspect of femoral condyles and inserts in the tuber calcaneus, allowing hock extension.
The muscles of the head can be grouped into various categories based on their functions. The first category is muscles used for mastication. The masseter muscle originates in the zygomatic arch and inserts in the lateral mandible. The pterygoidus muscle originates in the pterygoid bone and inserts in the medial mandible. The temporalis muscle originates in the temporal fossa and inserts in the coronoid process of the mandible. The digastricus originates in the caudal to temporomandibular joint and inserts in the medial mandible. The second category is muscles used for facial expression. The orbicularis oculi is a sphincter-like muscle that surrounds the eye. The levator labii superioris inserts in the upper lip and is responsible for the phlegmon response. The levator nasolabialis muscle supports the movement to the upper lip and airways. The conitis muscle allows the flaring of the nostril. The zygomaticus muscle originates in the zygomatic bone and inserts in the corner of the mouth and the upper lip. It raises the upper lip. The buccinator muscle compresses the cheek into the teeth for chewing. The other muscles of the head are the mylohyoidus muscle, which originates in the floor of the oral cavity and inserts in the rami of the mandible. This lifts the floor of the mouth and hence the tongue. The genioglossus muscle, which originates in the rostral mandible and inserts in the base of the tongue. The hyoglossus muscle originates in the hyoid apparatus and inserts in the base of the tongue. This pulls the tongue in for swallowing.
Now moving on to the nervous system, we're going to start with the brain. The three subdivisions of the brain are the cerebrum, the cerebellum, and the brainstem. The cerebrum is the part of the brain that controls voluntary actions. It is a larger, superior region of the brain and contains the hippocampus, basal ganglia, and the olfactory bulb. The cerebellum is a smaller part of the brain that plays a role in motor control. The brainstem is the posterior part of the brain that is joined with the spinal cord, pons, and medulla oblongata. It regulates the central nervous system. The meninges are membranes that surround the central nervous system to protect it. The brachial plexus is the nerve system that runs from the spine down the neck and into the forelimbs. We're now moving on to the digestive system of the calf. The papillae are structures on the tongue that give the tongue its rough surface and contain taste buds. The dental pad is at the rostral part of the mouth. Cattle use it to graze because they lack upper incisors. The esophagus is a muscular tube in which food passes through on its way to the stomach. The esophageal groove is a muscular tube made of the folds of the reticulorumen that bypasses the rumen, reticulum, and osmasum to the abomasum when the calf is young so that milk can be ingested immediately. The rumen is the first of the four stomachs of the calf. It is a place where the food that the calf eats is fermented using microbial bacterial. The reticulum is the second stomach in the calf. It has honeycomb lining and its role in digestion is to separate large particles that are not ready to be passed into the osmasum. The omasum is the third stomach, and its role in digestion is to absorb water and volatile fatty acids that haven't been absorbed already. The fourth and final stomach in the calf is the abomasum. It is considered the true stomach because it is most like the monogastric stomach. It secretes rennet, which prepares protein sources for further digestion. The duodenum is what connects the stomach to the small intestine and is the first part of the small intestine. The middle part of the small intestine is the jejunum. The ileum is the last part of the small intestine. The cecum is a pouch that marks the start of the large intestine, and the colon extracts water and salts from solid waste. The liver is an organ that functions include detoxification, protein synthesis, and production of necessary biochemicals. The pancreas is part of the digestive and endocrine system. For the digestive system, it secretes digestive enzymes, and for the endocrine system, it secretes hormones like insulin and glucagon. The gallbladder is the organ where bile is stored. The hepatic duct and cystic duct combine to form the common bile duct. Bile travels through the common bile duct when being secreted. The kidneys serve as a natural filter of the blood, sending waste to the urinary bladder. The kidney consists of two main parts: the renal cortex, which is the outer portion of the kidney. Its main role is ultrafiltration. The inner portion of the kidney is the renal medulla, which is divided into sections known as renal pyramids. The renal lobes are the portion of the medulla that has the renal pyramids. The renal pyramid's role in the kidney is to filter blood and regulate water and salt content. The testicle is part of both the reproductive and endocrine system. The function of the testicles is to produce testosterone and sperm. The epididymis is a cord connecting the efferent ducts from the rear of each testicle to its vas deferens. This is the penis. It is the male sex organ. The spermatic cord is the cord-like structure formed by the vas deferens and surrounding tissue that run from the deep inguinal ring down to each testicle. The papilloform plexus is a network of veins in the spermatic cord.
So we are moving on to cardiopulmonary system. The cardiopulmonary system consists of the heart and lungs, which are located in the thoracic cavities of the body. Pericardium is the sac that surrounds the heart. Left-right coronary arteries bring oxygenated blood to the myocardium. Right and left auricula, small pouch in the top corner of the left or right atrium that pumps the oxygenated blood into the ventricle. Right-left ventricle. Left ventricle receives oxygenated blood from left atrium and pumps it into aorta. Right ventricle. Right ventricle receives deoxygenated blood from the right atrium and pumps it into pulmonary artery. Ventricular septum separates the ventricles from each other. Cranial caudal vena cava. Cranial carries deoxygenated blood from the cranial part of the body to the right atrium. Caudal vena cava carries deoxygenated blood from the caudal part of the body to the right atrium. Right-left pulmonary arteries carries deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lung. Pulmonary veins are any one of the four veins that convey oxygen-rich blood from the lung to the heart. So we are moving on to the respiratory system. The respiratory system is involved in the delivery and transport of oxygen and the removal of carbon dioxide. The pharynx is a common soft tissue conduit for food and air lying caudal to the oral and nasal cavities. The epiglottis is a structure of pharynx which channels either food or air to go to esophagus or the trachea. Epiglottic cartilage lies caudal to the base of the tongue and is mostly elastic cartilage. The dilatoid cartilage consists of two parallel plates joined on the ventral midline. Arterioid cartilages are paired, irregular in shape, and are found at the top of the larynx. The cricoid cartilage articulates with the thyroid cartilage and the arytenoid cartilage and attaches to the first cartilaginous ring of the trachea.
The hyoid apparatus can be found between the calf's mandible and is connected to the styloid process of the temporal bones. The hyoid apparatus provides stability to the pharynx and also serves as an attachment to the pharyngeal, lingual, and laryngeal muscles. The trachea is a tube that allows the passage of air into the lungs. The lung contains two halves and is the primary source for gas exchange. Moving on to endocrinology, the hypothalamus is cranial to the pituitary gland. The hypothalamus secretes hormones that regulate many bodily functions. The pituitary gland secretes hormones that regulate homeostasis, growth, and reproduction. The pineal gland secretes melatonin, which is important in circadian rhythms. The thymus is an organ that produces T cells for the immune system. And that concludes our bovine anatomy and physiology. This was brought to you by Cornell University, Domestic Animal Biology and Productions. We hope you learned a lot from this motion picture.